welcome back everyone. Hope you enjoyed the break. It's time to dive into our next session, which features stories of progress of food service and restaurants collaborating with policymakers to enact change on menus and in operations. This session will be in two parts. They will flow from one to the next. The first part of the session is a panel policymakers reshaping menus in collaboration with food service, featuring case studies from New York City. And then the second part of the panel will be a presentation from Anne McBride of James Beard Foundation. So the first panel is going to be moderated by Tariq Sharif, the Business and Development Strategy Manager working with the government of the District of Columbia. Tariq works in the Deputy Mayor's office in DC, creating and implementing programs and strategies that address inequitable food access, and he was previously involved in shaping policy and international agreements with the Food Policy Director. Tariq is a former chef and was an operational manager at the DC Central Kitchen. He's also a dear friend of mine. Please join me in welcoming Tariq and the panelists to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Abby, for the wonderful introduction. As she said, my name is Tariq Sharif, and I work in the mayor's office in Washington, D.C., where I lead the city's strategy and programming to enhance our food ecosystem. As Abby mentioned, prior to this role, I was working as a food policy advisor to the D.C. Food Policy Director to work and increase our efforts on food access, security and food systems resilience, and sustainability across the city, much like our panelists will be doing here, who I'll introduce in a second. I'm also a recovering chef, as Abby mentioned, but I went to that other school up in Rhode Island, so we won't talk about that here. That's why I don't get invited here very often. But today I'm excited to talk about, host this panel and talk about and highlight the amazing work that's happening at the city level to use policy to reshape menus in collaboration with and to support food service. Before we get into that, and I introduce our panelists, I want to give you a little primer on the work we're doing in DC, because I have to. And so food policy, while it's a long-established field, is still small and growing at the local policy level. It's only existed as an official position in DC for the last 10 years or so. A little bit longer in New York and some other places. And we've made some huge strides in that time, doing everything from defining what local food is in our legislation and code, to enhancing reimbursements for school meals, supporting local and regional growers, adopting values-based procurement metrics, funding public-private partnerships to support food businesses with technical assistance and access to capital, cataloging and reducing our carbon footprint from food procurements, and the one I'm most proud of is deploying over $60 million to local food businesses. And even with all of that, we're just scratching the surface of how much we can do and use policy as a lever to make systemic change in the food system. So let's shift a little bit here, and let's dig into that work that's being done in New York, which I will say is a little further ahead in the procurement space than is in DC. And I want to talk to our panelists and introduce them, who are exemplifying this work in New York City as conscious culinary leaders. So first we have Neeti Jain, who is an environmental scientist and justice practitioner, who serves as the Strategic Partnerships Advisor for the New York City's Mayor's Office of Food Policy. That's a mouthful, always in government. Where she leads efforts to reduce carbon emissions from food procurement for the city in both public and private sectors. She is dedicated to creating a healthier and more resilient food system for New Yorkers. We also have Nelson Quiles. Okay, I got it right. He just told me and I don't want to mess it up. He is a 2006 CIA grad. Amazing, welcome back. And has spent his career with New York City Public Schools in the Office of Food and Nutrition Services, and now serves as Senior Director of Policy, Partnerships, and Communication. And in this role, he is working to shape policies, programming, and enhance partnerships to ensure all New York City students receive safe, nutritious, and fulfilling meals every day. We also have Philip DiMaiello, who's the corporate chef and senior manager of culinary development for Sodexo at Health and Hospitals New York City, which is one of the largest healthcare systems in the country. He has over 25 years of kitchen experience and worked his way up through the ranks, holding numerous executive chef positions, competing in culinary competitions, and serving in leadership roles for various culinary organizations, including the American Culinary Federation. And finally, we have Mary McCarthy, who is the Vice President of Sustainability at Levy Restaurants, where she works across the sports, entertainment, convention center, cultural attraction, and restaurant portfolios, which is pretty much everything they do, to reduce food waste and design menus targeted at solving today's and tomorrow's environmental challenges. And she is very passionate about bringing back biodiversity to the food system. So thank you all for being here and talking about the amazing work that New York is doing. So to start out, I will kick it to Neethi. It's great to have you here. And I'd love to hear about the work you're doing in public policy at the nexus of climate change and food, and tell us about the ecosystem you're building in New York.
Thank you, Tariq. So the work in New York City really kind of kicked off when we started to take a look at how food and climate intersect. And this work began in 2023 when we started with a carbon inventory. And so if we are able to go to that slide, that would be awesome. So we really just looked at how is food contributing to New York City's overall carbon footprint. And we found doing a consumption-based inventory where we just look at what people are buying and how their activities are contributing to the footprint, that food was the third largest contributor to New York City's overall greenhouse gas emissions. And that was such a moment of kind of recognition of like, this is not only a really big climate issue, but can also be a climate solution. So that's when New York City committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions from food by 33% by 2030. And then we also just looked at what we're buying. So the charts behind me show that, you know, a very, very small percentage of the food that we were buying in the ruminant meat category, which is in red, contributes to over 40, so 3% of what we're buying contributes to over 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions footprint, and other animal-based foods as well have just a significant impact on our greenhouse gas emissions. And so we also wanted to think about what we're putting on our plate as a city that is an enormous food buyer. We spend over $500 million a year purchasing food. We're, you know, essentially one of the other large restaurants, you could call it, in the country. And we have a lot of ability to use those dollars to align with the values that we really care about. So that's when we started launching some of our ambitious plant-forward initiatives. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide here. In order to meet this commitment for a 33% reduction by 2030, we thought about how we can change what we put on the plate across both the public and the private sector. So first we introduced, or kind of aligned with a program that Chef Phil will talk about at Health and Hospitals to really think about food as a source of medicine and health for our residents, and how we can use more plant-forward eating in the hospital system to both think about public health and planetary health. Then in the public schools, thinking about food education and how we talk to our K through 12 students about our food system, where their food is coming from, and what it does for them when it goes into their bodies, and then when they throw it away, and how it goes into either landfill or compost. And then finally, to engage the private sector and really think about all of the places that food is served across New York City, not just at the agencies, and how we can utilize the best and the brightest of the private sector to also take really ambitious steps towards working on food and climate. And we at the Mayor's Office of Food Policy have the honor of kind of uplifting all of the work that our practitioners do. We're kind of the connective tissue, so really excited to turn it over to the other folks to talk about the work that they're doing.
Great, thank you for that. And we'll come back to you in a minute because we're going to dig into some more of those topics. So we've talked about the work major cities are doing to move kind of food and climate agendas forward, which is through the policy lever. And there's two ways we do that: big P policy, legislation, laws, changes in that way, and then little p policy. And this is the way I describe to people to make it a little easier for them, which is internal changes, champions, things going on in agencies, internal work that's done that's not codified, but is still making that operational change to make that shift, which hopefully we can then codify in law based on the work that's been done to move things forward. And so let's shift to that operation side of things and see how people are actually doing this work and leading that change. And I'd like to talk about panelists. So we'll start with you, Nelson, and kind of how you move the needle in sustainability, food, and climate within your areas. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about Plant Forward Fridays, which is a really cool program that you're working on.
Thank you for that. So yeah, I think the first thing we had to realize is our size and the impact that we could have. As an organization that feeds 900,000 meals a day at over 1,800 sites, we realized that one minor decision could have a pretty large impact on a daily basis, and understanding that there would be a ripple effect that would be caused that would that would really impact just beyond that school cafeteria. So I think having our team understand that we have a very unique opportunity to create a significant impact on a daily basis has been very important. And I think we've really kind of focused on 3 pillars. The first was having sustainable procurement practices, really focusing on local and regional products and trying to source things that are relatively close to us. That was number 1. And then on top of that, just being very mindful of future procurement and really trying to find climate-friendly foods and incorporating those onto our menu. Secondly was waste reduction and efficiency. So we've had great success with programs like our share tables, composting. We've also made some innovations to our forecasting tools that our staff use to reduce or minimize overproduction. And then I think lastly, probably the most impactful has been menu innovations. So we've introduced plant-powered recipes. A real big thing for us, which was huge for our organization, was back in 2022, we introduced back then something called Vegan Fridays. It was Vegan Friday for one Friday. And through this process, we also learned engaging with the community and working with transparency and really providing the why behind systematic decisions was incredibly crucial to getting buy-in and ultimate understanding of any type of big change. So after that first Friday, we quickly shifted to plant-powered Fridays, where we offered a center-of-the-plate vegan menu item, but it was also accompanied with other vegetarian or plant-based recipes surrounding it. And that was big, because I think folks appreciated that we weren't telling them that they had to eat something, but we were making it an available option and allowing them to choose. So that was really, really big for our team, and this is our 3rd year doing it, and through constant, I would say, community engagement, student surveys, student taste testings, and really taking the time to educate families, administration, and students on why we're making these decisions and making these options available has really allowed the community to understand the reason behind something, understand that it's an option, and it's available there if they want it, in addition with many other options. So all of our menus are student taste tested. They must get a 70% approval rating from the students themselves before they are incorporated onto the citywide menu. And that's been huge for us, because we take great pride in saying our menus are created for students, but also approved and student-driven. So that's just been really good for us, very promising. So those are pretty much our 3 main pillars on what we focused on, how we can impact New York City and beyond, and while educating the future and having students understand their impact and their food choices moving forward.
Fantastic. Some common themes we're hearing from that first panel into here, so we'll pick up on those in a little bit. Philip, same to you. What are you doing to move the needle in sustainability, food, and climate within your work?
Well, it's very similar to what Nelson was just stating. We just took a little different approach at Health and Hospitals, being the largest public medical facilities throughout the United States. When we started our plant-based journey, we took a deep dive into the community. We wanted to make sure that they felt comfort in the food that they were going to receive. And we service all the underserved in New York City. So therefore, these are individuals that are not going to a restaurant once or twice a week. They're mostly cooking at home. So we also wanted to make sure that we gathered ingredients that when they left our hospitals, they can actually prepare these meals at home. And we actually give them literature on that as well. So we went and we did a deep dive, and we did a deep dive through all 5 boroughs that we service. We have a large population of Latinos, so we really focused on Caribbean food, Latino food, and then obviously in Queens, where they speak 185 languages, we had to be a little diverse. But we came up with ingredients, and we really acted within our staff by inclusiveness. So including the staff, they're the ones that live in the communities. So they're the ones that can actually help us, support the communities. So inclusiveness and building confidence in them in order to prepare these meals. And we tied everyone in from nursing to the people who clean the rooms and the doctors about why we wanted to go on this journey. And we went on a road trip with the entire team and just educated everyone involved. We also, like your students taste the menu before it goes out, we do specials just like you would do in a restaurant. And we have individuals that go up there and actually they're called food service associates, and they take your choice for the day. And you have a first choice of plant-based, you have a second choice of plant-based, and then it'll go on to other types of protein. But they're not called plant-based and they're not called vegan. Those are dirty names. We call them the chef's special of the day, and this is why you should try the chef's special of the day. So nothing goes on our menu unless we get an 80% or better to make our menu. And the only reason why our clients already graduated, so we're at a higher level. So that's where we've been successful. And we have a great support system at Sodexo. I mean, everyone works together. It's never they work for me, it's we work together, okay? And that's just the way we approach the whole operation.
That's fantastic. I love that. And a little 80% competition. Although I will say 70 is still a high bar for schools because I have an almost 2-year-old and she is the pickiest eater I know in the world. Unreal. So Mary, over to you. And I'm failing to move these slides forward, so I do apologize. These are some of the...
Yeah,
if you
if
want
I
to talk
could
about
just
these
mention,
before I jump to you, Mary, sorry.
diving into the communities and looking at what we're serving, we cook from scratch at the Culinary Center. So everything that you see there, whether you're in Queens and you're eating a red curry vegetable with roasted tofu, or you're up in the Bronx and you're eating penne pasta with a pea pesto and fresh roasted tomatoes. So and our sancocho and arroz con gandules are really popular in our communities where most of our Latinos live.
Yeah.
So that's basically how, and then the trajectory of where we started in early 2022.
Well, actually, I'm going to stop you there. We'll hold off on this one. We'll come back to that
Okay.
in a little bit for some follow-up. I'm going to take away my own slides here and my own conversations. Mary, to you, give us a rundown on how you're moving the needle in this space.
Sure. So Levy, if you're not familiar, we're a part of Compass Group. We have a net zero commitment through that, but we do sports and entertainment hospitality, and that means that we serve a lot of hot dogs and hamburgers, and we have to deal with that as part of our net zero commitment. And the opportunity to work on the challenge here in New York City gave us an opportunity to really experiment with how we take that holistic approach to try and think of sports and entertainment as an opportunity area, right? The potential there is huge, I think, for the broader cultural shift around meat. And so the US Open is a kind of iconic event. Levy has been operating it in partnership with Restaurant Associates for over 2 decades. And what I love about it is it gives us an opportunity to kind of help us bridge the gap on that cultural piece, right? The US Open has a very international audience. It's based here in New York. And so it already has a very diverse menu. So the opportunity to kind of experiment and really use that as the leader for us in terms of how we continue to develop our plant-forward strategy was super exciting. And the US Tennis Association has been working on sustainability for over a decade now as well. So they were excited to do it. The flip side of the potential of that is it's a challenging event. They beat the 1 million attendee mark over 3 weeks for the first time last year. It's very diverse operations. So you'll see there, in the course of 3 weeks, we serve 7 restaurants, everything from fine dining to casual, concession stands, suites, dining for athletes. And so really trying to figure out how we deliver this change that we're looking for in a 3-week period, take a year to revisit our strategies and do it again to make that incremental progress is a challenge. So we treated last year as the baseline to kind of figure out where we're at. And this year we're really excited to be continuing to make those changes on menu. We're focusing this year really on just how we design the menus, more vegetarian and vegan options, but also just that holistic approach. So how we make plant-based the default, and then we add an option for animal protein. And I'm really also excited. We're going to be piloting some blended burgers, a mushroom beef blend this year. And so for us, this just means we can learn and have this immediate impact here at this event at a large scale, but then also take that back to our 250 locations around the country where maybe the conditions aren't quite as warm for making these changes.
Fantastic. So, Neethi, coming back to you real quick. There's a lot of congruency that we're seeing here in the public-private realms, and you talked a lot about this work pushing forward policy that helps enable these things to happen. So how, if at all, has this kind of impacted the food policy work in New York City as these groups and schools, hospitals, venues are making these changes already? Are there any supporting services or barriers to change at the policy level that exist? And then how can other cities and jurisdictions create the same ecosystem that you developed in New York?
It's really like this public-private partnership model is so successful primarily because we can learn from each other. And I think that's where like the success of following values-based procurement on the public side is something that we can take to our private sector partners and say, here's how to align your purchasing and your dollars with the values that we really care about. And then when we partner with the private sector through programs like the Plant-Powered Carbon Challenge, we get to take learnings from them, particularly on things like how can you really use some of the good like behavioral nudges and defaults and restaurant quality meals and helping diners make good and sustainable green choices and bring that all back into our agencies. And so the Plant-Powered Carbon Challenge, for example, has signatories in a bunch of different sectors. Of course, we have the US Open. There are a couple other folks in the audience that are actually members. We have Morrison Healthcare. I know Lisa's out here. I know Katan and Cecil from NYU is here. Like, we have a lot of folks in sectors that have very different diner audiences that come into the food eating space with very different expectations. And so getting to kind of take in that information and use it when we think about food policy in New York City and how we can better serve our agencies is just a really cool learning model. And then something that I've seen is together both public and private sector are demanding better tools to do this work and really to track our impact. So, to ease the data burden a little bit and be able to look at what we're buying and how that impacts our food, we're seeing calls for better software, better technology that will make it super easy so that it doesn't have to be this thing that you embark on with tons and tons of money and tons of time, but rather something that other cities can take on, even if they're not a super well-resourced food policy office, but is something that becomes kind of part and parcel of a food plan or a climate plan.
Fantastic. Absolutely love that. So let's dig into the data. We talked about operations, how you're doing it, and there's questions coming in, which I think we'll probably go through and answer some things on here. But let's talk a little bit about the data, kind of the work you're doing and the pilots and how those things are changing where we're moving to. So let's start with you, Mary, this time. Let's talk about some of the pilot work you've done for the US Open. Which is one of my favorite events to attend, by the way. I used to go religiously every year, not so much as I've gotten older. But what is the value you see in these pilots for Levy and how that's going to shape kind of the approach to sports entertainment across your brands and across the globe?
Yeah, it's a great question. I see it as a bridge event for us. We do everything from NASCAR to NFL to the Kentucky Derby, and each of those have very different guests, right? And very, very different guest expectations coming in. I think the other challenge for us is oftentimes we're someone's splurge moment, right? So when I think about my own dietary behavior, right, what the lunches that I make for myself, the dinners I make at home are different, and then when I'm splurging, I approach that differently. That said, we still have a real responsibility and I think a real opportunity to link that splurge moment with more sustainable options, right? We can't just sort of settle with putting a big steak on the plate because that's easy and what people expect. And so for us, doing something like at the US Open, we're doing a couple of innovative pilots in NBA and NHL arenas as well. I think that helps us then learn how we really meet those guest expectations. Interestingly, the concern is rarely about financials. It's always about, is the guest going to be happy, right? Are they going to enjoy the food that they're receiving? And so it's just a good way for us to pilot in what we see and particularly with a partner like the U.S. Tennis Association that sees the value in this, to really figure out how we exceed those guest expectations and then bring that back where the conditions might not be quite as supportive, but we know we need to make changes anyway.
Great. Phil, let's go back and dig into those metrics a little bit that you wanted to talk about. And let's learn a bit more about how you're measuring success with data.
Absolutely. Well, there's a couple of ways that we measure success. Number one, our carbon footprint is measured by a lot of it. We have people who just study that all day long. And I think the first year that we did it, we actually reduced it by 36%. And that was mostly through our purchases. It also basically helps us when we do something like that, where we look for ingredients that the people that we buy them from, the purveyors, they also have a product that's sustainable. We use one product that we have that usually shiitake mushroom stems are thrown away. We have a product that we utilize that, so it's total utilization of product as well. The other way that we measured it, obviously, we counted the meals that we served over the first year. In the first year, we hit a little over 850,000. We've gone well over the a million or two in the past. We're into our third year as a plant-based. And we have a platform called Experiencia also that we use, which is real-time data that we get. And that's by us rounding with our patients and making sure that they're satisfied with their meal. It's the best way to find out. I mean, it's just like going to a dining room table when you're in a private restaurant and asking them how they liked it. So those are the ways that we're actually looking at it. And in our metrics that we've seen, that we've gotten over a 90 to 95% acceptance rate of the food that we're serving. And I think that's because of our deep dive into the community. And when people are ill, what do they want? They want comfort food from their childhood, right? So that's what we prepare for them. And that's pretty much how we've, like I said, if anything is less than 80% when we first started a special, we look at reviving it or fixing it somehow or just not serving it at all. So it has to be popular with the people that we serve.
That's fantastic. I mean, and I think it's really important to note that all three of these, well, four, but these three operators here, operate in what I think we probably describe as captive audiences, right? They're in that space, they're gonna eat the food. And even with that, they're still ensuring that hospitality first mentality and making sure that everyone is taken care of and treated like family, and the food is good and valued, and the patients, the students, the guests, the spectators all get what they want and what they need from the food, which is so critical to making this successful. So just want to call that out because I keep talking about that, and I want to, let's clap for that because that is fantastic. So, Nelson, moving back to you a little bit, what are the tools that you use to evaluate kind of the climate sustainability impact of the work you're doing? I know in 2022 you partnered with the Humane Society, which is now called the Humane World for Animals, to look at the carbon footprint reduction from the plant-powered Fridays that you were mentioning. Can you talk a little more about that data and how that has shaped your thinking on other program changes that you want to make?
Yeah, so we implemented Plant Power Fridays in 2022, and through our work with the Humane Society, or Humane World for Animals, they put us in contact with a sustainability consultant based out of Seattle by the name of WPS. And we opened up all of our records to them, allowing them to compare our food purchases from 2022, once we implemented Plant Powered Fridays, versus 2018, prior to not having many plant-forward recipes on the menu. And it took them about 1.5 to 2 years to complete the study, but we found that there was very promising results. And I'm gonna read the results because I wanna make sure I do justice to the proper numbers and data that was shared. But once they compared our records from 2018 to 2022, we found that plant-forward menu changes cut the carbon water footprint from animal products by 40% and the land footprint by over 50%. So to put it in a little bit more perspective, per student, this meant saving 30 pounds of carbon, 300 gallons of water, and 300 square feet of land. And WPS did such a great job of giving us like equivalents to this to really present to the community so that folks could really visualize what those numbers mean. So the proper equivalents to that would be recycling 640,000 bags of trash, providing drinking water to 3.5 million people, and lastly, freeing up enough land to be able to feed 14,000 people for a year. So we knew the impact of plant-powered recipes incorporated into our menu because of our scope would have a significant impact, but we never thought that it would lead to 42% reduction in carbon emissions per student. So I think those numbers are staggering, and it's be foolish of us not to continue this trend and think beyond the Friday. Now we're thinking about how do we incorporate plant-based options throughout the regular week, normalizing it, and not even calling it out anymore. I think we see our future as there's a plant-powered option available every single day, and there is no longer a plant-powered Friday. We really want to normalize this for our communities. We want to normalize it so that it's not something folks think about it. It's an option that's there, it's available to them, and there's really not much thought that goes into it anymore. So I think we're on that trend, and we're very excited for the opportunities that that's going to bring for us.
Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit more about what challenges that you face kind of internally, externally to implement these, internal policies and changes that you're making to make a sustainable difference within the food system. What do those challenges look like? How do you overcome them? Are they supply chain related? Are they sourcing? Are they taste preferences? Is it identifying vendors? Sales mix retention, right? Pricing, these are all businesses, right? So we need to make sure that's being taken care of. So what does that look like, and is there pushback at the leadership level? So whoever wants to jump in on there first.
I can start.
Yeah.
I think for us, the biggest challenge is the expectation of fan is coming into, bringing into the venues that we operate. It is a cultural icon of America to have a hot dog at a baseball game, right? And so we want to maintain that incredible experience and change it, right? And that's a tension. And I think from the leadership level, our leadership is fully supportive of making those changes, and they know that hot dogs and hamburgers sell, right? And so we have to, I feel like it's my responsibility to create the conditions where we're making these menu changes and we're demonstrating that we're maintaining that guest experience and we're maintaining those sales. If I don't, they get pulled off the table, right? So we still have to hold ourselves to those standards, I think, and be unwavering on that point. But the benefit of that is, and this is always my hope, is that someone walks into one of our venues, has an incredible experience, right? Hopefully the game's good, they have a great time, incredible food and beverage experience, and they are exposed to just a little bit of sustainability storytelling, right? And they walk away linking that sustainability storytelling with this like strong and pervasive element of our culture, and think differently about it, right? Now, hopefully, to the earlier panel's point, it's joyful, it's fun, it's not having to give up. But we have to take on the responsibility of maintaining that quality to be able to do it.
Yeah, every day there's a challenge, obviously, but how we look at it is that, number one, we have a great support system. Everyone was for this, and we jumped in deep. We just didn't have, 2019 we had Meatless Mondays, but when we went into the plant-based journey, we went full force. So we were feeding people that were meat-centric. A lot of people from the islands that, the vegetation that they grow were mostly root vegetables. So we had to educate them as well on how good the meal could be, not only for them, for their health, but also for their taste. And that's why we also went the route of everything was scratch cooking, like Chef Ann mentioned before, because we can control the ingredients. Especially the sodium. There's not a box of salt in our kitchen. All of our flavors come from the processes that we use as far as the cooking methods and fresh herbs and having the product speak for itself. And I think the biggest thing is procurement, especially in our days today. It's so difficult to get, I'm not going to say quality, but ingredients that are very clean, especially when it comes into the plant-based world. So that's what we look for. We want a product that has maybe 3 to 5 ingredients that we know we can utilize that's not going to subject the individual to eating something that's not healthy for them. And so that's pretty much what we do. And it's been very successful because you can cook healthy and have have everything taste better, okay, or good, or educate individuals, because we're creatures of habit, things that we grow up on. But when you're used to being meat-centric, there's a little pushback when you first start. But education is everything.
Yeah. Takes a little reprogramming and some time to make that change.
I can maybe
please.
kind of expand on that point, which is I feel like a lot of the maybe challenge, but also opportunity is like the cultural shift moment that we're having to just have a conversation around how plant-rich menuing can be such an opportunity for creativity and innovation. And this is really where I think like chefs and people who are really, really experts in creating delicious food can lead the way. They can develop recipes. They can use ingredients that we are not, used to using in diets that we consume here in the States, and create spaces of joy and excitement and interest so that people feel like making the more sustainable choice is not something that is a sacrifice, but rather something that they get to do. And have a conversation about it and get some of that sustainability storytelling, but the focus is really on delicious food. And I think this is where like assistance and expertise from a lot of the folks in this room that have that ability on how do we engineer menus to be really, really exciting? How do we create dishes that are colorful and vibrant, that speak to the cultural diversity of New York City? How do we do all of that successfully? Presents such an opportunity for us. And I think it's like getting everyone else as excited about this cultural shift is, I think, something that we definitely are thinking about in the stories that we tell.
Fantastic. We got a couple questions we're going to take from our online poll here, and then we're running low on time, so I want to make sure we have time for closing thoughts too. So one of the big ones here that's been upvoted quite a few times, comments from the panelists seem to be focused on environmental sustainability. Are there initiatives that go into other pillars like social or economic sustainability? Is there any work that any of you folks or Neetha,
I'll
you
go
doing
really
that?
quickly,
Yeah.
and then I hope you all will speak to this as well. It's actually interesting that all of our comments have been about environmental sustainability because that's not where we came to this work at first. Like, Mayor's Office of Food Policy is very much focused on public health and like making sure that New Yorkers live healthy, long lives and have access to fresh and affordable produce. And then we also are like responsible for taxpayer dollars. So like we're also thinking about the economics of this. And I think Chef Phil will tell you that this process has saved us a ton of money in the hospital system. We've literally saved 59 cents per tray by switching to the plant-based default program. And that we've been able to really think about things like chronic disease and longevity of New Yorkers by feeding folks diets that are higher in fruits, vegetables, and plant-based proteins.
Very quickly.
Yeah, and I think as Needy had said, when you look at it, sometimes when you're just focusing on one item, and food was obviously the major focus when we started this, things start to fall in place. And it kind of becomes an eye-opener. You say, hey, I'm using this product, okay? It's totally sustainable. It's helping us cut our carbon footprint. Now let me look for more like that. So when things start to fall in place like that, it just sparks the energy, and you just start looking at other ways of, following the procedures and the policies.
Yeah. Mary, I know you want to say something, so no, you good? Okay. We're about to run out of time here, and I want to make sure we have time for our next presenter to talk about the work that's happening at the federal level. So I'm going to change up my closing question to tie into that a little bit better. What are some state, local, or federal policies that each of you like to see kind of happen or change that would support the work you're doing now, if there are any?
Oh, doing that in 10 seconds feels hard. I think for us, what's been nice about the New York City policy is it was kind of a rallying moment, right? We already had our net zero commitment, but it created that moment for us to have a meaningful conversation with the U.S. Tennis Association to kind of be even more intentional. So I think where we can create those spaces where we're just creating that kind of sense of urgency and intentionality at the local level is going to help us when we're trying to make changes nationally.
And I just think, you know, I have the pleasure and the honor of working for a company that has their own goals. So a lot of their goals were already set even prior to some of these policies coming out. So we're ahead of the game.
Great. Nelson?
If I could just add.
Yeah?
If I could just add to that, accessibility is a big thing. So New York City has been universal free meals for all students, but recently New York State passed some legislation where all New York State public school students will receive free meals. So I think that is huge in the sense of it's an option that's available to folks now that might lead to some really healthy choices moving forward and just building some positive habits.
Great. Anything you want to add?
And I think I'll just say that, like, you talked about little P policy and big P policy. This is where, like, other cities are doing this as well. Like, we're getting really excited by cities all around the world that are like, you know what, this can happen even in places where you wouldn't expect. We're seeing, like, small little P policy changes related to values-based procurement and plant-forward menuing in places like Brazil and in Milan and, you know, cities where you wouldn't expect that to happen. So it feels like this is a moment for transformation.
Yeah, great. And I will say that gives, I think, Neethi and I some work to do to keep pushing these things forward, and hopefully in DC we'll see free school meals for all very soon. No promises there. I don't make the laws. Well, thank you all for an incredible panel. I know we could probably talk about this for many, many more hours, which I think we may do later. If there are more questions, I know there are, please come find all of them. And if you have some for me, I'm happy to take them as well throughout the next day and a half. I think these are some amazing leaders that are doing great work, and they are imagining, believing, and acting to exemplify and embody the work that we are all here to do. So thank you again to our panelists. All right, and now I also get the pleasure of introducing the next speaker, who is a great friend and an amazing woman, Dr. Ann McBride. She is the Vice President of Impact at the James Beard Foundation, where she oversees all of JBF's research, training, and advocacy work, including the Foundation's annual Independent Restaurant Industry Report, Climate Solutions for Restaurant Survival Campaign, Chef Bootcamp for Policy and Change, and Women's Entrepreneurial Leadership Program, which is just a ton of work. Ann also holds a PhD in food studies from New York University and wrote her dissertation on the changing role of the chef in the 21st century. She is a native of Switzerland, the co-author of 7 books, and she is a member of the 2024 Aspen Institute Food Leaders Fellowship, which is a program in which we first met. I can sincerely say I want to be just like her when I grow up. I'm a little intimidated by her. And so let's welcome to the stage for a presentation on city and federal advocacy opportunities and climate change resources for restaurants and food service professionals.
Thank you so much, Tariq. It's so great to see you all here. Some of you were along in my very long PhD journey because I worked at the CIA for 10 years on the chef-driven conferences, was at the first Menus of Change, etc. So it always feels like a huge honor when I get to come back and just show up and not have to worry about any logistics. So thank you to the great team here. I'm here to tell you a little bit about about what we're doing at JBF. You probably know the awards, but there are still too many people in the industry who only know the awards, which are a great thing. Tune into the live webcast next week when they're happening in Chicago. We do a lot of other things as well, which is what I oversee. And the key thing that we do and why I'm here, because it's about how to empower chefs, how to use their voice. And it's more important than ever to make change, obviously, and to use any platform, big or small, that you have to be doing that. We train chefs for at the federal level because we work in all 50 states, so that's the easiest way to do it. But all of the tools and resources, what works at the federal level works at the state and at the local level as well. So we always encourage chefs to be like, you don't have to be meeting necessarily with senators. You can be meeting with your mayor, with your city council members. The tool, the strategies, the tactics are really the same. And we launched earlier this year our new impact framework, where we're really grounding everything in research. That's really key, especially for the sector that JBF works the most with, which is the independent restaurant industry. A lot of data that is available out there covers high volume food service and not the realities of the independent restaurant industry. From that, we look at what challenges and opportunities are surfaced by data and research, and we develop training programs to support chefs in their journey. Chefs and operators, we work a lot with owners, also in people on the management side of things. And then the advocacy work, obviously, which is what I'll focus on today. I just want to share a couple of the resources that we have on the research side of things so that if you're interested, you can consult them. There's links at the end of my presentation for everything. We work with George Washington University. We've been working with the University of Michigan Executive MBA program. They've done case studies with us for the last 2 years. We do the Independent Restaurant Industry Report. That's a partnership we have with Deloitte, where we do surveys and focus groups also to produce the definitive report and data on the independent restaurant industry. And my goal with that report is when I am at a conference like Menus of Change and people are talking about restaurants, they also show some of our data on the slides, and not necessarily only the slides that might be coming from other organizations around that. So that's on the website. Rip it apart, take it all, copy paste in your slides, etc. And the reason why we're doing all of these things is all of this research and all of that. Our mission is to lead the restaurant industry and the food system at large towards a new standard of excellence. But it's not just about telling chefs, you need to do better. It's really about supporting them in the journey and taking things off their plates to be additive there and to make it a little bit easier. It's harder than ever to be operating restaurants. And so how do we not just pile on with more asks? Here is what's more of your responsibility, but really rather supporting folks in that journey. And the next few slides are what I start every boot camp with, because it's also very isolating when you're running a small restaurant or even a few small restaurants. You're so deep down in the day-to-day and in the grind, it's so easy to forget the larger community you belong to, which is why you have such impact. So these numbers here, the fact that our industry is a 1.5 trillion industry, almost 16 million jobs, right? Like those are very significant numbers, and that's why your voice matters so much as a chef. The fact that 163 million people dine out every week, right? Like this is, you're not just you cooking, you're not just serving the 30 people or 200 people who might be in your dining room at a given time. You are this aggregate there when you operate restaurants. And then these are some data points from specifically single location full service restaurants as part of the research we did with George Washington University. So independent restaurants alone represent 3% of the US workforce. And in a lot of the places where we go and do roundtables that I'll mention later, the hospitality industry is typically 10 or 11% of the employment in any given state. In places like Georgia, Wisconsin, Colorado, that's really what it is. So anything that impacts our industry impacts a whole lot of people, which is why you have a right as chefs to be asking for change and to be asking for things that serve you better because of all of this massive impact. And there's often someone at Menus of Change who presents this data, so I'm hopefully early enough in the program to be the first one to show it to you. This is the 2023 numbers, which are still, the 2024 ones should be coming out this week or next, on the share of total food spending and the share of spend away from home. About 15 years ago, people started spending more money on food they were not preparing. That's the food that is in restaurants, of course, but also in grocery stores, et cetera. And what I always love about this, so 2023 is the peak, where the highest spending on food away from home. I love that it obviously dipped down, way down in 2020. People started cooking at home a lot more and went right back to having you all cook for them. So I think that's not innocent, that's why the numbers are so high in 2023, which again means more power. And also because when you are eating something that you haven't prepared, you really need to have a high trust in the people who are making that food for you. There's a reason why emperors and kings had tasters, right? You can very easily be poisoned through food. That's a very easy way to get rid of someone. So, and you don't have to get rid of them, but also get like very seriously ill and all these kind of things. So that's why hospitality and food service are the most trusted industries. There's a reason around that. It also means really that you have to know so much more now. That's why a conference like Menus of Change started, right? You have to know so much more to be operating a restaurant, to be cooking. You need to understand so much about health and sanitation and sustainability and nutrition and all these kind of things, which makes it very challenging, and also why you need to have kind of easy resources and that allow you to focus on what you're doing and use that voice and focus on that part of work. And all of that is really why diners, lawmakers, and media really appreciate hearing from chefs and operators, because you're passionate people, you care about people. That's typically why you got into this business. So it makes you really unique advocates from that perspective. Our government affairs person in DC always says that chefs, farmers, and mothers are the most effective advocates. And chefs, lawmakers would way rather have a chef in their office than a lobbyist, right? And they would much rather go to your restaurant and have a conversation than have you in their office also. So that's why we train chefs on really using that power. Also because chefs are such unique liaisons in their community. The fact that when you're a chef, you're not just that one person, you are a community leader, you're an employer, you're touching your staff, you're touching your suppliers, you're talking to diners every night, you have media coming in, lawmakers coming in at all levels, et cetera, et cetera. You really are able to, in a very gentle way, affect and impact so many people's opinions. And that's more important than ever. That one-on-one touch, that individualization of issues, the fact that a lot of lawmakers will care about something because they can put a face to it. There's a reason why at the State of the Union, there's always these people, or all the political speeches, there's always John from down the street was telling me this, and Mary was telling me that. There's a reason why these stories are important, the personalization, the humanization of the big problems and issues that then go into legislation and funding, et cetera. So that's why lawmakers really love hearing from chefs. And what we do is, as part of our boot camp, applications for the next one open on Thursday, by the way, and we have a couple of alums in this room. We bring chefs together on a farm for 3 days. And the reason why we do it that way, not in a conference room or anything like that, is because it's full immersion. And part of that is demonstrating that every decision you make, everything you do as a chef is part of advocacy work. The food you're choosing to purchase, the people you're choosing to purchase from, the benefits you might be offering your staff, all these kind of things, that really is part of your advocacy. So, here we have chefs in Washington State a couple weeks ago learning about regenerative agriculture practices on the farm where we were. The chefs also all cook together because change does not happen solo. It really happens in collaboration. And you need to make negotiations. And so we do this surprise exercise where they are put together. They have an hour and a half to be preparing a dinner for 50 people. And they have to collaborate, right? And obviously, they're very used to collaborating. But that's part of the advocacy making too, the fact that you need to be able to negotiate with folks on the fly to make things happen. And then they also do a campaign exercise training. They work together in group, developing a messaging around a couple of issues that we give them to focus on. And then they go back and for 6 months, they work on their own campaign. And that can be something that is more at the state level using those tools. These are some of their presentations. We have them do graphics and all those kind of things. So again, this is really about collaboration and that importance, and also the fact that you do not have to know all the facts yourself when you're a chef. Every couple of years, we do a Chef Action Summit. We were in Asheville, North Carolina in early April, had over 300 chefs there who were coming at a really, really hard time. This is when all the tariffs were being announced. It's been a really challenging time for our industry, obviously, and a lot of people people were feeling very down about would they be open by the end of the year. That's a real question for a lot of people right now. And so and what power did they have in a time when it felt like nothing would work on the advocacy perspective? So bringing people together, refreshing their skills around that was hugely impactful, both from the actual skills, but also the optimism and the hope that was needed at that particular moment. And we ended the conference on the Tuesday around lunchtime. By Tuesday afternoon, I was getting texts from chefs who were calling their lawmakers from the tarmac on their way home. One testified about a bill in Trenton and got it to not go to a vote, but to stay in committee as a briefing instead. So immediately being able to put these tools to use and feeling like, all right, I can make a difference. Showing up is so important because that is how change can happen. And I'll go quickly through some of the findings of our climate campaign, which we started last year. This is data-driven, as I mentioned, with GW, with a report we did. One of the things that is really important for us around this is to have made climate action an economic argument, because then that becomes a bipartisan argument. We work with chefs in all 50 states, in districts and states that are represented by people who might not always believe in climate change, who might not always want to fund climate change, et cetera. So when a chef walks into a lawmaker's office and says, here is how my restaurant has been impacted because I'm in Texas and I designed my restaurant with tons of open space, of outdoor space, and it's been 100 degrees for over 60 days and no one is coming. I'm in North Carolina and it's April and I'm turning on my AC like I would in August. There goes my 3 to 5% typical profit margin, right? Like those costs can add up so quickly and really eat up the benefits, the profits of the restaurant. So making climate a bipartisan argument has really resonated. We talk about things slightly differently depending on who we're talking about. In some cases, we might say climate. In some cases, we talk about extreme weather events. I was mentioning we were in Asheville. For any of you in North Carolina following that, they're not getting the aids that they need to be able to rebuild. And it means even if restaurants are open in a place like Asheville, where is your staff living? You have no staff if there's no housing for them, right? So there's all of these things that need to happen, and this is where, or your farmer's farm may have been washed out. Where do you get your ingredients? The tourists are not coming back if they're thinking that there's still a lot of disaster around. So making climate an economic argument makes it very powerful to have all of these conversations because chefs are taxpayers, and when your revenue is down, your tax bill is down. You're laying off staff. It means they might move. They're not paying as much taxes, et cetera, either. So we've activated 1,500 chefs over the last year with 82 conversations with lawmakers. And one other stat that I'll mention here too is almost 1 billion in earned media impression. This is a message that's really resonating with the media to tell the stories of chefs. And unfortunately, I'm sure there's some people in this room that have had that conversation too, might be thinking that I talk to way too many people where I give these kind of presentations, and people who work in policy and people who work in climate tell me, I never thought of chefs as being impacted by climate. Never think of restaurants as being impacted by climate. I should bring them to my task force. I should bring them to what I'm like, yes, you should, absolutely. So being able to collect all that information through these roundtables that we're doing around the country with lawmakers, farmers, and chefs, local community organizations, et cetera, really help collect all of that information, because what happens then with that data, when we bring chefs for advocacy, and if any of you have been on the Hills or talked to your representatives at any level, your role is to give your story, and then we come in, or our government affairs people come in, and they will tell the data, we share the policy piece. Your job is just to tell your story, but we get to have the aggregate information that makes all of that much more impactful. Overall, when we did 24 meetings on the Hill in December, that is 24 at least staffers and lawmakers from all over the country who go back and say, oh, I heard that from California, I heard that from Texas, I heard that from New York, et cetera, and that's what makes that impact so important at the federal level when it comes to advocacy. I'm out of time, so you'll get all the slides with the stats. But the current legislative landscape is obviously extremely complicated. It's very easy to think that not much can happen. What we're currently working on is activating our chef network around the reconciliation bill and the programs there. So obviously conservation programs are usually impacted by that, but so are SNAP, Medicaid, et cetera. So to give talking points for chefs to be able to advocate about what they're most caring about when they're having these conversations with their lawmakers. We cannot give up on policies that protect our future as an industry and as a planet. And when this powerful and enormous community comes together, it's impossible to ignore the voice of chefs and of our industry. That's it. Thank you so much.